So welcome to the Becoming a Serverless Engineer for Beginners series. So this is going to be a very beginner-friendly series, heavily hands-on from the very beginning, where we are going to teach you how to create your first serverless functions, integrating it with APIs, using a couple of AWS services, including Lambdas, DynamoDBs, and a whole range of other services, up until a point where you can create a serverless orchestration, right, using AWS Step Functions. This is going to be a fun and an interesting build. If you are new here, kindly give us a like, drop a comment that you are ready for this journey. And then if you have any questions, kindly feel free to drop in the comments section each time. There is going to be a link attached to the video description where you can access the code and everything needed for this journey. Let's get right into it. And then please don't forget to subscribe. Let's go. So we are going to create our first Lambda function today as part of our serverless journey. So to do that, just search for Lambda. And once you have Lambda, depending on the time you are looking at this, if this is your first time, just simply click on create function. And then I'm going to give my function a name. I'm going to call my hello world fn. And then the runtime, which is pretty much the programming language in which your code is going to be in, I'm going to select Python. And then under the additional settings, I'm going to create a row purposely for this Lambda function, and then we are going to make use of it. So I'll click on this, and then I'll simply click on create a new row. So this Lambda, for now, will have these basic permissions and then nothing else. So I'm just going to leave it as it is, and then click on create row. So this is the new row the Lambda created, and it has assigned it to my Lambda function. Click on save. I'll create my function. There are certain key things you need to understand now that you've created your Lambda function. So I'll quickly go to the configuration tab, and on the configuration tab, the key ones you need to understand is your timeout, right? So Lambda function by default can run for a maximum of 15 minutes. And then a timeout pretty much tells you the time it takes for this particular Lambda code or this serverless function to execute. Currently, it's set to 3 seconds. So what this means is that the Lambda will only run for 3 seconds. And then if after 3 seconds, your Lambda is still processing, what will happen is that the Lambda is going to time out. So Lambda functions, you are built pretty much by the number of minutes it takes to execute, right? So always when you are writing your Lambda function, ensure it's run and then has the right or appropriate time range. So I'm going to click on save, and then the permission we just created is in here. By default, it assigns us the Amazon CloudWatch log group to it. If we had other or extra permissions, why I showed you that way was that so that you see that you could select those permissions and then add them to it. So if I expand this, you see the permission policy itself and all that. Now let's quickly come back to our actual Lambda code itself. So in a Lambda function, there are key things you need to understand. One is something we reference as your Lambda handler, right? And inside your Lambda handler, there are some key things you have to always pay key attention to. There is the events coming in, right? So the event is pretty much what the input payload contains, or what is in the input payload. So when someone is trying to access your function, or when you are trying to hit your Lambda function, you are sending in an event, right? That payload that comes in is captured in this dictionary called the event. And then you have the context that pretty much tells us about the time, the memory limits, and a couple of details that the Lambda function needs to work with. The handler is pretty much the main guy in here. That is the first function or method that is invoked anytime your code is called. So I'm just going to quickly update this, and then I have a very simple Lambda function code. All that I'm saying is that I'm calling my Lambda handler, and then inside my Lambda handler, I'm getting an event, and inside an event, there is a property called name. So I'm just getting this name, and then I'm returning a hello plus the name. This is all that I'm doing as part of my Lambda function, and I'm importing JSON so that JSON will help me with the structure. If there is something that you want to, there is a package that you want to attach to your code that you don't have, as you work with serverless functions or Lambda functions, you realize that there is something you reference as Lambda layers. And what these Lambda layers does is that it gives you the room to attach these permissions to this Lambda functions. So that's something slightly advanced, but I want you to know that if you worked on a Lambda code and then you are facing, say, a certain package doesn't exist in the Lambda runtime itself by default, you can add them as Lambda layers. So this is all that my code is doing. Once you have your code, the next thing you do is to deploy your code. So I'm going to click on deploy. And then after that, I'm going to simply test it. So I'm just going to click on test and I'm going to create a test event. So I'm going to call this one say test. And then inside the test, I'm going to send the event. So you see, remember as I said, each time you invoke your Lambda function, you are sending an event. So if this Lambda was tied to a bigger application, that application will bring in the event. But because I want to test the Lambda function itself, myself, I'm just going to create my own simple events, which you have this probably in the Git repo or something. So all that I'm having here is just a simple JSON, which states the name and then the name is in here. So what I'm going to do is to come here, save my event, my test event, and I'll click on invoke. So as you can see, now this is the response. Hello, Serverless Engineer, right? So this is how basically you can create your Lambda functions. Now, the permission we added initially did something. As I mentioned earlier, added as permissions to CloudWatch. So what this is going to do is that Lambda is going to create a log group. So if you have a bigger Lambda code, which is doing a lot of things, you can at least monitor the logs and see the execution times in CloudWatch log. So I just come to monitor, click on view CloudWatch, and we will see that in here. So you see, this is the Lambda invocation that I just did. And if I come in here, you see the time the Lambda started, right? And then the time it ended and the seconds and everything that it did to do it. So this is how you can access your CloudWatch log too. So this is pretty much how you create your first Lambda function as part of your serverless engineering journey. Thank you. Now we are going to learn how to connect our Lambda functions to API gateway, or to connect it to either a REST API or an HTTP API. So it's very simple to do. So quickly, let's jump right into it. So we have a simple Lambda function. This is just a dummy Lambda function. If you are starting out, this shouldn't be a problem. It's just a simple Lambda code doing nothing fancy. So how then do we tie this to our API gateway? First, I'm going to update this my Lambda code. So now I have a very simple Lambda code. All that we are seeing is that there is going to be an event coming in from an HTTP API, and then once it comes in, we are going to pass the name, right? We are going to send in the name as part of the event coming into the Lambda from our API gateway. We fed that out, and then we return a certain response to the end user. So this is the Lambda function. So I'm just going to update my Lambda function, click on deploy, and then now I'll come to search and then search for API gateway. So I'm going to create an API gateway. We have several forms. For this, we are going to basically use a simple HTTP API. This is not much different from the REST APIs that you know. The difference is that this is more like a lightweight and a cost-effective version of the REST APIs. WebSocket is pretty much what we use for chats and then to allow those back and forth communication. So I'm just going to click on build. And I'm going to give my API a name. For now, I'm just going to leave this as IPv4. Click on next. I'll click on next and show auto deploy next, and then I'll create. Now that my API is created successfully, what I'm going to do is to add something that you reference as route. So route is pretty much telling the path, right? That's when someone hits our API, it should take. So I'm going to create my first one, and then with this, the method is going to be a get method. So a get, as the name means, I'm fetching something, and then the path is going to be my hello. So once someone hits this path, I'll click on create. Once someone hits on my get, I'm going to do something by adding an integration to it. So I'm going to click on attach integration, and I'm going to create an attachment first. Now this attachment type is going to be a Lambda function, and then I'm going to select for my hello Lambda function. So the Lambda function we created earlier, or the Lambda function you created, right? And then I'll ensure I have this thing checked. Grant API gateway permissions to invoke Lambda. If you don't have this, your API gateway wouldn't be in a clear position to invoke your Lambda function. So I click on create, and then I've created my first route, and then this is it. Now I'm going to create another route again. So what I'll do is that I'll click on come back to my route, ensure I'm up here, then I'll click on create. Now the method I'm going to use is going to be post. So post allows us to send in the event, right? So in this case, I want to be able to send in my name, so I'm going to do a post on the same route /hello create, and then for the route I'm going to attach an integration, and then I'm going to use the same integration target, right? So it's the same Lambda function. So let me do attach integration. So I've attached my Lambda functions to these two paths, and then this is it. If it was any other, and no, if we didn't enable that auto deploy, what would have happened was after making any change to our API, right, the next step would have been for us to deploy it. But because we have auto deploy, that is being done automatically for us. So now we have configured our API gateway. So for us to get our API URL, what we do is that we come to stage, and because we are using the default, we just select that, and then we will see our invoke URL here. So this is the URL that ties our backend to whatever application we will build together, right? This is what we're able to invoke our Lambda functions with. So what I'm going to do is that I can basically just make a simple call to see if my Lambda function is being invoked successfully. So what I'll do is that if I paste this in my browser, and then I add, say, / hello colon name is equal to, let me do Kobina. No, let me do engineer Kobina. Right. Or let me just do Kobina. So what I'm saying is very simple. I'm hitting my API gateway. I'm going through this route. And then because I'm opening this through a browser, this is a very simple get operation. So if I click on enter, this is the response. Hello, Kobina. So you're taking this to a Lambda function. We are getting this a get method, and then we are getting our response. So the same way, if I did this, say if I tested this with a post command, I can simply do that so that you don't do any external configuration. I think I can test this in Cloud Shell very simply. So this is just a very more like a terminal that I want to use. I didn't want to open any external device to worry us. So I'm just going to update this URL, right, to see the response for post. So this is my base URL. I've updated it, fine. Good. So I'm making a post request, a curl command, a post request, and then I'm giving the name as Kobina. So if I click on paste and then enter, you see this tool is going in there, and then the method is a post method. So now this is how basically we connect our Lambda functions to our API gateway, in this case a REST API. So what I'm going to do before you continue is that I'm going to add a basic or a simple error handling to our Lambda function if you are going to update it, so that if there is any issues or if there is no names or anything like that, our Lambda can handle it as we progress with the class. So I'll just copy this. This is a very simple updated Lambda code, right? So it's the same thing as what we're doing. We are getting our events, picking the name, and then I'm adding a bit of an error handling that if the name field is not there, we just give them a response that the name field is a required field, a required parameter. So after the change, I'm going to deploy my Lambda function, and then we are going to test this once more. So I'll just come to my get operation again, and then now I'm not going to pass any params for the name. So you see, the name field is required now. This is how basically you can play with it. Thank you so much. Let's continue our serverless engineer journey in the next part. So we are going to learn how to add a database to a serverless app. At the end of it all, you're going to understand how to create a DynamoDB table, that's our database, and then how to build a full CRUD, which is create, read, update, and delete stuff from our database through our Lambda function and then API gateway. So let's get right into it. So we are going to create our database, which is going to be a DynamoDB. So I'll basically click on create table. I'm going to call this table a task, and then my table is going to have a partition key, which is task ID. The type is going to be a string, and then I'll leave everything. Now under customize settings, I'll select this customized and then ensure I have on demand selected, and then I'll basically proceed to create my table. So now that our table is creating, let's proceed to create a Lambda function, which is going to house this. So I'll just search for Lambda, and then once you search for Lambda, basically going to create a function. I'm going to call this function task API FN. Again, the runtime is going to be Python 3.14, and then leave everything as default for now. Or let's just associate permissions to this once and for all. So let's come customize custom execution rule, create a new rule. So this rule by default will have the Lambda basic execution rule, which is pretty much allowing us to create some log groups and things like that. And then I'm going to add this permission sets to it. So this is just a simple permission policy, and all that is doing is that it is doing DynamoDB put item, allowing us to put item, get items, update our database, and then do all those CRUD stuff we seek to do. So since this is my ARN, I'll just go to my database, find my table which is ready, get my table ARN, and then I will update this. So this is my actual table ARN. Then I'll click on my create row. So now my Lambda function, click on save, then create. So I'm just going to update my Lambda code. So this Lambda function code is very simple. All that is doing is that it's a Lambda function that is going to be invoked through an API gateway, and depending on the method, right? If it's a post method, we are creating a task. If it's a get method, we are getting a task based on a specific ID. If it's a put, we are trying to update. If it deletes, we are deleting it, and then we are calling the individual methods in the Lambda function code itself. So this is all that the Lambda code is doing. So if you look at it, update, list, and all that is in here. So a very simple Lambda code. So I'm going to deploy my Lambda. And after deploying my Lambda, what I'll do is I'll go to API gateway. You can search for API gateway. In the previous lesson, we created a simple HTTP API. If you are new and then you are just watching these components, just create a simple HTTP API, and then that is it. Click on HTTP API, create it, and then you can continue from this part of the video. So this is my serverless demo API. It's nothing fancy. We used it to test and hello world. You can create yours. I'm going to create a new route, and I'm going to call this route task. The method is going to be a post method, which is going to be the first one. And then under the same task, I'm going to create a new, which is going to be a get the same task. So I'm going to create it for all the the 4 or 5 CRUD operations you want to do. So this one is to create, this one is to get them. The next one is going to be to put, which will allow us to update. Another one, you have our delete operation. Then the final one, which is another get. But in this case, this is going to be slightly different. So we are going to do a get, but we are going to do task /id. So what we are doing here is this. With this particular get, we are not getting all the available tasks, but we are getting the task based on a specific task ID. So we are fetching a specific task by doing this. So this is it for now. And then what we are going to do now next is to integrate our Lambda functions to our various routes. So I'm going to do add integration, and under the post I'm going to create an integration. The integration type is going to be a Lambda function, and then I'll look for my task Lambda that we just created. Ensure you have the grant API gateway permission access. So I've done my situation. I'm going to do it for all the other methods we created. So now I'll pick its add attachment, come to delete, add attachment, get, add attachment, and then the final one, the same Lambda. So I'm using the same Lambda for everything. So if I had different Lambda functions, I could have selected the different Lambda functions. And then once I have that, this is fine. I've done the association and the integration the way we want it. Because we are using an HTTP API and then we went with the default configuration, this automatically deploys it for us, as I mentioned earlier. So we don't really have to do any new stuff. So that's pretty much it. So now that we are ready, what we are going to do is to try and then test our integration. So if you are looking for your API URL, just come to your stage and then you get your invoke URL. So I'm going to pick my invoke URL. Then for this test, I'm simply going to use Cloud Shell so that I can keep everything in AWS itself. Then what I'm going to first do is to create this path with my base URL. So what I'm pasting in here is my URL. So there's nothing fancy. So all that I'm doing is this. So you can type base is equal to then your URL. Then I'm going to first try and then create a task. So this is the task I'm going to create. I'm going to then run this curl command. So this is the command I'm going to create, which is curl-x base. So this is using the base URL. And then I'm going to proceed to create a new task with the name learn step functions. So as you can see the response, now I have a task ID in the DB table. I have the title and then the status and the time it was created. So now the next one I'm going to do is to try and get a list of all the available tasks in our DB table. So I can basically run curl $b/task, which is doing the get. And then you can see this is what we currently have in our DB table. There are various tasks. Remember, I made us make a slight change where we're able to get a specific task based off the ID, right? If you want to test that one out also, all you have to do is to run the same command, just that this time around you do slash, then you can get your task ID. You can see, so this is the response. So now this is how we integrate our database, our Lambda functions, create several routes in our integration. Thank you, and then let's meet in the next part. We are now going to learn how to orchestrate multiple Lambda functions using AWS Step Function. So this pretty much means that we are going to learn how to chain several Lambda functions into a very resilient workflow, right? With retries, error handling, and a couple of things. This pattern is often used in order processing, data pipelines, approval flows, and a whole range of stuff as you work with serverless function or as you become a serverless engineer. So in this simple bit, all that we are going to show is that scenario is that we currently have a database, right? And in the database is a very simple DynamoDB table. And then inside the database, we have a couple of task IDs, right? With a status set to done. So all that we are saying is that we just want to create a workflow where we're able to invoke and then push the tasks into completion by chaining a series of Lambda functions. And then we are going to do this orchestration using a step function. So now let's get right into it. So the first thing we are going to look for is a step function. So we are going to create our first step function. So I'll open step function. Then I'll click on get started. Or if you don't have the get started option, you can click on state machines and then you click on create your state machine. So what I'm going to do is to give my step function a name. I'm going to call mine task completion pipeline. And for this, I'm going to use the standard. Click on continue. And then what I'm going to do is that there are multiple ways you can create it. It's either we create it by doing a drag and drop and then construction or own orchestration flow, or we can use something we reference as ASL, right? That is the Amazon States language. It's pretty much a JSON structure that you can use to create your own orchestration. That's very simple to do, so I'm going to do that. So I have a very simple ASL here, which will be readily available in the repo. You guys will have access to it. So once you click on it, so this is pretty much what is happening. Now, once my orchestration starts, I first want to validate if the task exists by calling the particular Lambda function. And then if it exists, I want to do complete, that is update my data table database using this step function action, and then I'll set it to complete. Then if need be, I will notify users by another Lambda function. This is going to be a very simple demo, so I'm not going to do a lot of technical stuff or technical bits in this. Just we are going to create a Lambda. So the first thing is that I'm going to search for Lambda, and then we are going to create our 3 Lambda functions. There are inbuilt stuff that you can use, right? There are lots of them, adding stuff into the DB table, S3 and all that you can drag and drop depending on what you want to use. But for now, I just want us to see how we can integrate Lambda, which is very simple. And then it works cut across for all other services or the actions that you have in here. So now my first Lambda, I will do validate task, right? That was the first Lambda I want to create. So I'll paste it. My runtime is going to be Python. And what this Lambda is going to do is that we are going to use this Lambda to validate if our task ID is in the database. So I have to ensure it has the appropriate permission, right? So I'll come to create custom execution. I'll create my own role. And then the permission, I'll look for DynamoDB. So in this case, the action I want to do is to try and then get item from the DB. For resource, I'm going to do all resource. I don't want to specify a specific table. This should be fine. Then I'll click on create role. So this is my first Lambda function, save. Then I'll create it. So I have the Lambda code in here. This is a very simple Lambda code. All it's doing is that it's going to get a tax ID as part of the event. If the tax ID exists, then it proceeds to do a get item from the DB table, and then we then continue our journey as per our state machine orchestration. So I'll get this one, deploy it, have my function ARN, come back to my state machine, my code. Let me click on the first one so that I can easily see where it is. Then I'm going to update my resource ARN. You see currently it's in red because this resource doesn't exist. So I have it in there. Now I'm going to create my second one, which is going to be my complete tax Lambda. So the same way. For this, the permission is going to be update because I said per this orchestration flow, we just want it to, we want the Lambda to update the value in there from false to true or something for the completion. So I want to do update item. And then with the resource, I'm just going to do all resources. I don't want to select my specific table. Then I'll create my row, save. Then I'll create my function. This is also a very simple code. This is also a very simple code. So what that is doing is that it gets the tax ID as part of the events and then goes to the tax table, then calls the update item operation and it updates it. So I'll deploy it. Let's make sure I deploy this one. Now the final Lambda function. Before that, let me just copy my function ARN, come to my state machine, which is the second one, this one, the complete task. Then my final, which is my notification. So in Railroad, what you can do is that you will probably integrate this with SNS, SES to send emails and do all that. If you want to see how to use some of those features, I have a lot of quality tutorials where I use those services to build other stuff. So I'm not going to do that in here, but the logic and the rationale is pretty much the same. I'm just going to create a function. This function is just going to be a dummy function with nothing fancy in there, just an acknowledgement stuff, the same Python runtime. This Lambda function is not doing anything, so I'm just going to create it directly. We are not invoking any service in here, so all I'm doing is that just call simulate a successful task sent and then there's a notification sent. So that's what that is doing, nothing fancy. Let me deploy, get my ARN, come to my state machine, then I'll connect this. So now I've connected all my Lambda functions successfully. Let me create my workflow, and then step function in itself is going to create the necessary permissions needed to invoke all the Lambda functions and the appropriate resources. So this is my state machine and everything seems fine and good. So what I'm first going to do is to test it. So to test it, it's very simple. I'll just come to execute, and then in here I'm going to pass an event, right? So I'm just going to paste an actual tax ID. So let me come to my database again. So this is a very simple database with this table item. So you can just simulate this and create a database like this. Nothing fancy. Now on my state machine, I'm going to replace this with my actual tax ID. Then I'll start the execution. So you see, The execution is happening. Currently, it's invoking this Lambda, and then it failed. So what happened? So it's timed out. So the first Lambda function timed out. So let's look at it. Now, come to my configuration for my first Lambda. So the get item operation took some time. Let me set it to about a minute. This should be more than enough. And then for the update, also for the first invocation, I don't want any timeout issues. I think 30 seconds should be fine, but let me just set it to a minute. The last one, 30 seconds should be fine. Now I'm going to try the execution again. So I'll click on start new execution. The same execution stuff. I'll start it. As you can see, it went through all the Lambda function, and then the execution was a success, right? So this is how you orchestrate several Lambda functions, and then this is how you use step functions. If you want detail logs, you see whatever happened in here. Because our final Lambda is not doing anything fancy, when you go to monitor, although you will see that it was invoked, but we are not using SES or SNS or any service for notification. That's why you didn't see anything. So this is pretty much it. So you can try and then test wrong IDs that are not part of your DB table, and then you see everything working end to end. So now this is how we simply set an orchestration using Lambda functions and step function. This is a very good hands-on stuff. Modify your Lambda functions, make it detailed, and then if you have questions, kindly drop them in the comment section, and I'll do my best to respond. Thank you so much for watching. In the next video, we are going to take on some slight advanced stuff like how to integrate SAM and then do a lot of fancy stuff. Please, if you are new here, give us a like, subscribe, and then be part of this cloud family. Thank you so much, and then let's meet in the next videos.